In 1970, I was given command of 247 U.S. soldiers. My mission was to find and destroy a major enemy fortress. I followed our doctrine perfectly, to the letter. And my reward was 23 of my boys dead, and a 21-year career, ruined. Then I had to stand by, just stand there and do nothing, and watch 4 Australian SAS operators do my job for me, with a budget of $620. My name is Jeffrey Martin Reynolds. I'm 93 years old now. Back then, I was Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds, commanding officer of the 4th Battalion, 31st Infantry Regiment. I was 39 years old, a decorated officer who'd fought in Korea. I was a professional. I thought I knew everything about war, and I was there. I saw every single second of it. I saw how wrong I was. For 54 years, I haven't said a word, not a real word, about what happened. General Peterson, my CO, he's dead now. Most of them are. But I still have this list, a worn piece of paper. I keep it in my wallet. 23 names. They were good men, young men. Lieutenant Miller, just 22. They followed my orders, and they died for it. And I have to make it clear. It wasn't a blunder, not in the way you think. My planning was, and they said this in the report, exemplary. No, my men died for a doctrine, for a belief system that was fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. And I owe it to them to finally tell that truth. I've never told my family this, not my wife, not my kids. This is the first time. I need to get it out before it's too late for me, too. So why listen to an old man dredge up the past? You need to hear this. You need to understand why the silence, the complete and utter silence inside that captured enemy camp, was more terrifying than any firefight I'd ever been in. You need to know what that Australian sergeant, a man named Thompson, what he meant when he looked at me and said my entire multi-million-dollar operation was just an alarm bell for the enemy. And you need to stay with me. You need to hear how a single newspaper headline, a few words in the Washington Post, did what the Korean and Vietnamese armies couldn't. How it ended my 21 years of service. How it killed the man I used to be. You think you know about that war. Let me tell you, you don't know the half of it. It was May 1970, Benzung Province, just north of Saigon. The VC were using it as their own personal highway, a command hub. And High Command, they were getting desperate. They wanted it shut down. So they created Operation Anvil Strike, a nice, neat name for a sledgehammer. My unit, the 4th of the 31st, got the job. 247 of my boys, plus a handful of M48 tanks. The environment? Christ. It was the end of the dry season, just about to tip into monsoon. You're talking 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 95% humidity. It wasn't air, it was water. You wore it. And the jungle. 1 minute you're in triple canopy so thick you can't see the sky. The next you're in a rubber plantation with rows so perfect it felt like you were back in Ohio. The smell. That was the first thing that hit you. It was always there. Damp, rotting, sweet. Like flowers and death all mixed up. We set up our forward base on May 12th. I remember flying in on the Huey. You look out and you just see this massive brown scar we'd carved into the green. a city of tents and steel and mud, and the smell changed. The second your boots hit the metal landing pad, the jungle smell was gone, replaced by us, by the smell of America. Diesel exhaust, the sharp, almost clean smell of cordite from the artillery batteries firing all day and all night. The chemical tang of napalm that hung in the air even when the strikes were miles away. You felt the heat right away, not on your skin, deeper, in your bones. A wet, heavy heat that soaked you in seconds. But me, I felt confident. This was my world. A world of logistics, of firepower, of control. War was a math problem, and I had the answer sheet. I knew my job. I was good at it. This was just one more equation to solve. And then you'd hear the stories. In the officers' mess late at night, guys talking about the Australians, the SAS, always in whispers, like they were talking about ghosts. I heard a captain from the 173rd talking one night. He said, "I swear to God they don't walk, they just appear. They talk about these four-man patrols, disappearing for weeks, coming back with numbers that didn't make any sense. No casualties on their side, dozens on the enemy's." I remember turning to my XO and saying, "It's bullshit, all of it, campfire stories. 4 men? What were 4 men going to do in this hell? We were an army. We moved with armor, with artillery, with air support. That's how you fight a war. I thought they were cowboys, primitives, playing games in the jungle while we were doing the real work. I had my maps, my timetables, my 247 soldiers. I had strength. I had power. What did they have? A handful of guys with funny hats. It was a joke." It happened 2 days after we secured the empty camp. 2 days of finding traps, of watching my boys get carried out on stretchers. My liaison officer brought them to my tent, 4 of them, and when they stepped inside, the air changed. I was in clean, starched fatigues. They were something else. Their uniforms weren't green, they were stained. A patchwork of mud and sweat and God knows what else. Worn thin. They were lean, not skinny, wiry, like wolves. But the smell, Christ. It wasn't just body odor, it was feral, like damp earth and rotting leaves and something metallic underneath it all. The smell of the jungle itself. I physically recoiled. I took a half step back. I remember thinking, clear as day, this is their SAS, their elite. They look like they've been living in a ditch for a month. I expected professionals. I saw primitives. The one in charge, Sergeant Thompson, he just stood there, patient, letting me look. I felt I had to say something, take command. So I stepped forward, trying to be the gracious host. And I looked him in the eye and said, "Sergeant, I can have my quartermaster get you and your men some fresh uniforms and a hot meal." And Thompson, he didn't move. He just held my gaze for a second. His eyes were incredibly pale. And he replied. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the hum of the generator outside. He said, "No thank you, sir. We prefer to smell like the jungle, not like a target." And I just stood there. I had no answer for that. A target? What the hell was he talking about? For the first time, I felt like I was speaking a different language. It wasn't arrogance on his part. It was a statement of fact. A fact I didn't understand. I watched them for a minute after that. They were checking their gear. It was all wrong. Their rifles weren't standard issue. They were these butchered L1A1s, sawn off, wrapped in dirty green rags. Junk. My regimental armorer would have had a stroke. Their webbing was cut to pieces, holding just the bare essentials. Everything was tied down or taped over. No rattling, nothing shined. It was a violation of every single thing I'd learned about maintaining your equipment. And then I saw something I'll never forget. One of his men, a kid, he took out his map, and he closed his eyes, and he held it to his face and just breathed in, like he was smelling it. I turned to my XO, about to say something, to make a joke, but I stopped because there was this deadly seriousness about them. They weren't playing games. It was the first time a tiny crack appeared in my certainty. The first time I thought, maybe I'm the one who's wrong. But that was just the beginning. I was about to find out what they could do with those ridiculous-looking rifles. He laid it out for me, Thompson, not all at once, but over the next hour. He explained why they smelled that way. He told me the VC could smell an American patrol from 150 meters away on a good day. 200 if the wind was right. The soap we used, the insect repellent, the chemicals in our processed food, even the tobacco in our cigarettes. It created a scent profile, an olfactory signature. So for 3 days before a mission, his men ate nothing but rice and local plants, used no soap, no deodorant, nothing. They washed in plain water, rubbed their skin with mud and crushed leaves. They were trying to erase themselves. He said, "We're not trying to hide, sir. We're trying to not exist." I just stared at him. He was telling me that our hygiene, our very presence, was a liability, a dinner bell, and I still thought it was extreme. But then he told me the numbers, that their patrols had a 90% lower chance of accidental contact. 90%. It was the first time I felt my certainty wasn't just cracked, it was crumbling. Then he told me how they moved, and it was just completely backward to me. My battalion, we moved fast, 10, 12 clicks a day, a show of force. We owned the ground we stood on. Them? They moved maybe 2 clicks a day, sometimes less. I thought it was laziness. It was patience. They'd sit in one spot for 6 hours, just listening, watching. He told me about radio discipline. My platoons were on the radio constantly, sit reps, check-ins. It was doctrine. It was control. His men, they never used the radio unless it was life or death or the target was confirmed. He said, "Every time you key that handset, sir, you're screaming your location to anyone with a receiver." And our engagement philosophy, fire and maneuver. We find them, we fix them, we finish them with overwhelming firepower. They did the opposite. Their goal was to find the enemy without ever being seen, to watch, to learn, to wait, and only strike when it was perfect. He looked at me, his eyes pale and steady, and said, "We don't want a fair fight, sir. We want to be a ghost with a rifle." That's when the two philosophies just collided, right there in my tent. My entire career, my 21 years of service, it was all built on the idea of the sledgehammer. On speed, on overwhelming firepower, on technology, on being a loud, terrifying, intimidating presence. You let the enemy know you were there, and you dared them to do something about it. And here was this man, this sergeant from a country I barely thought about, telling me his entire philosophy was the scalpel. Patience over speed, invisibility over intimidation, precision over volume. He leaned in, his voice dropping even lower. He said, "You want Charlie to know you're here. We want him to never find out we were." And that got to me. It burrowed into my brain. because it made perfect, terrifying sense. It was then that the first real numbers started filtering up the chain of command. In a classified briefing, I saw the ratio for their operations, the kill ratio, 1 to 500. I read that number 5 times. I thought it had to be a typo. It wasn't. But I still hadn't seen it in practice. It was all still theory, paper. That changed on May 19th. It changed in a way that I will never, ever forget. It was May 19th, 2 days of sitting in that captured camp, listening to my men die. Not in a firefight, but to sticks and strings and holes in the ground. Miller's platoon, good boys, they were out on a short recon, just a 3-hour loop. I was in my tent. The heat was just suffocating. The air tasted of dust and canvas and my own stale sweat. The hum of the generator was the only sound, a constant grinding noise, and the radio sitting there silent, too silent. I remember looking at the map, at the red circle where Miller was supposed to be. Just a line on a piece of paper. Then the speaker crackled, a burst of static. Then a voice, thin and terrified. Contact, contact, wait. Another burst of static. I grabbed the handset. My throat was dry, bone dry. The weight of the plastic felt like a stone in my hand. I could hear the distant, muffled popping of rifles. Too many, far too many, and they were close. The next 2 minutes were just chaos. Pure, unfiltered chaos over the radio. I could hear Miller screaming orders. Get a base of fire on the left flank. Where is it coming from? But his voice was drowned out by the sound of AK-47s. A ripping, tearing sound, unmistakable. And the screams. God, the screams. Men I knew. Men I had coffee with that morning. I was trying to get a sit rep, trying to follow doctrine. Charlie 1, this is Bullhorn 6. Give me a location. Give me a target for Artie. But all I got back was noise. Panic. Someone was yelling, RPG, get down! I heard the explosion, a dull crump even over the radio, followed by more screaming. They had walked right into a perfectly executed L-shaped ambush. My boys were firing back. I could hear the heavier thud of their M16s, but it was just volume. Noise into noise. They couldn't see them. They were firing at ghosts, and the ghosts were killing them, one by one. I was about to do it, the unthinkable. I was screaming at my fire direction center, giving them the coordinates, Miller's coordinates, a danger close fire mission. I was going to kill my own men to save them. My finger was on the transmit button. I took a breath, and then silence. Utter, complete silence. The enemy fire just stopped, as if a switch had been thrown. My own men stopped firing a few seconds later. On the radio, there was nothing but heavy breathing. I thought it was over, that they were all dead. My voice was shaking when I spoke into the handset. Charlie 1, does anyone copy? Nothing. Just the hiss of dead air. Then a new voice, calm, unhurried, almost conversational. It was Thompson. Bullhorn 6, this is Kookaburra. Be advised, targets have been serviced. The area is clear. I couldn't speak. I leaned my head against the tent pole, the rough canvas scratching my skin. I whispered, how? And his voice came back, still calm, still quiet. We watched them set the trap, sir. We just waited for the right moment. They never saw us. A pause. We count 31 enemy KIA. Our patrol is fine. Over. 31 in 90 seconds. And my men, they had lost 8. 8 dead for nothing. I dropped the handset. It hit the dirt floor with a soft thud. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about war, about power, about being a soldier, it all turned to dust and blew away. I flew back to the main base that afternoon. The flight was only 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The noise of the Huey's rotors, usually something I found comforting, was just noise. Empty. When I got back, I had to debrief General Peterson's deputy. I tried to explain. I told him how Thompson's men moved, how they used the jungle itself as a weapon. I explained how they'd turned the enemy's own ambush into a killing field in under 2 minutes. And the deputy, a full-bird colonel, a man I respected, he just looked at me with this blank expression, and he said, "So you're telling me your men walked into a trap and the Aussies had to bail them out?" He didn't get it. He couldn't. How do you explain to someone that everything you've both been taught your entire professional life is a lie? In the following days, I became a ghost at my own briefings. I'd look at the operational maps with their big red arrows and circles, and it all felt so crude, so loud. I questioned an order for another massive artillery prep. My XO pulled me aside. He asked me if I was feeling all right. He thought I was losing my nerve. He was wrong. I was just starting to find it. I wrote a report, a long one. I detailed everything. The timelines, the costs, the casualties. I attached Thompson's after-action report, the one he'd written in pencil on 3 pages of a notepad. I put my battalion's $1.8 million 23-man failure right next to his $620 zero-casualty success. I highlighted the final kill ratios from that theater of operations. 1 American dead for every 12 enemy. For the SAS, it was 1 for every 500. I made the case, as clearly as I could, that our doctrine was getting us killed, that we were using a sledgehammer to perform surgery. The report was classified, and then it just vanished. 2 weeks later, I was in a meeting with General Peterson. He slid a copy of the Washington Post across his desk. The headline was there in big black letters. My career was over. They offered me a quiet post in Washington. I put in my papers for early retirement the next day. For 54 years, the guilt hasn't been about the firefight. It's been about what came after. The 6 men from C Company who died a month later in an identical ambush because my report was sitting in a drawer. 23 of my boys, plus those 6. I carry their names with me. I see their faces. How many of them would still be here if I had only listened sooner? That's what I live with, every day, for 54 years, every single day. Why do we do it? Why do institutions keep making the same mistakes? It isn't stupidity, it's pride. It's inertia. We'd invested billions and decades into the sledgehammer doctrine. To admit it was wrong, that was more terrifying to the men in charge than any enemy. It would have meant admitting that all the men who died before my 23 died for a lie. So my report got buried, and the boys kept dying. In other jungles, in deserts. The same mistakes, just a different year. The lessons were there, in black and white, in 1970. But it took, what, a decade? 2? Before our own special forces started to truly listen, to hunt, not just to fight. You look at the operations in the 80s, the 90s, you see Thompson's ghost in them, finally. But how many lives did it cost to get there? How do you explain it? Having all the proof and doing nothing for decades. Where are you doing that in your own life? Ignoring the truth because admitting you're wrong hurts too much. You remember the questions from the start? First, why the silence was so terrifying. Because it wasn't victory. It was the sound of my own irrelevance. The sound of 23 men dying for an empty piece of ground. Second, what Thompson meant by an alarm bell. He meant our greatest strength, our noise, our power was our biggest weakness. We weren't a sledgehammer. We were a dinner bell, telling the whole bloody world we were coming. And the last one, how a newspaper headline broke me. Because armies survive defeat. They cannot survive being made to look foolish. That headline proved a philosophy was bankrupt, and they needed a face for it. I was that face. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to swallow your pride and admit you were completely wrong about something important? How did that feel? If you want more stories they try to bury, then subscribe. 1 to 500. 54 years on, that number still wakes me up. How many would be alive if we'd just listened?